Arctic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the panel. It's really incredible experience here, but also great insights. Ms. Connolly, I want to thank you in particular, not only for your testimony, your outstanding work on the Arctic. As my friend from Maine said, I am going to focus on the Arctic here. In terms of the, and you mentioned the NDAA, and I appreciate you mentioning that because, you know, what we are really reacting to as a Congress to get serious, that's a requirement for an O plan actually for the Arctic, was our current Arctic strategy, which you may have seen. This is a DOD product, 13 pages, half of them are pictures. Climate change is mentioned 6 times, Russia once in a footnote. It's not a serious strategy. So what we're trying to do is get serious and have the Department of Defense get serious on that. So thank you for mentioning that. Also in your testimony, you know, I think it's appreciate you talking about the massive Russian military buildup, which also includes, you didn't mention in your testimony, 4 new brigade combat teams, and as you mentioned, a new brigade headquarters for the military, Arctic military, 40 icebreakers, and more to come. Some of those nuclear powered. We have 2. One is broken. So. But in terms of the 3 military exercises you mentioned, they didn't get a lot of press in the United States. Do you view those as provocative in terms of what the Russians were doing, Ms. Connolly?
I viewed the last one, the March 2015, because it was a SNAP exercise at full combat readiness. We need to get the Russians back to the rules that the OSCE of transparency, 45-day notification over a certain level, because this is where misunderstandings and accidents happen. So that to me was provocative and unprovoked.
And we were pretty unaware of that.
We certainly were unaware of that.
Let me ask you, I'd like the panel to take a look at this map. It kind of goes through what you were talking about in your testimony. The red is the Russians and recent buildups. If you look in the right-hand corner, though, of that map, there's 2 blue dots. Those are 2 U.S. brigade combat teams. They're the only Arctic-trained American warriors that we have in the active duty forces. One of them is the 425. It's a brigade combat team in the Army. It's the only airborne BCT in the entire Asia-Pacific or the Arctic. The Department of Defense wants to essentially shut that down. So the Russians are building up dramatically. We're not even, you know, there's some people saying, hey, we got to stand up. We can't be provocative. We're not even being provocative. We're just folding in terms of Arctic forces. In light of what the Russians are doing, and a theme of this hearing about signaling, we've signaled weakness, Putin exploits weakness, his appetite grows after each meal. What do you think Vladimir Putin would think of the United States removing its only airborne BCT Arctic capability and really cutting our Arctic forces in half?
I think, Senator, that they view them very similar to, as General Jones said, as they viewed our reductions in Europe. We are leaving. We are leaving the playing field. I agree with you completely. We do not have much of a U.S. security architecture in the Arctic other than our missile defense at Fort Greely and Thule.
Do you think that he'll see this as more weakness and possibly look to exploit it in other ways?
Well, I mean, we have told the Russians that they are our partners in the Arctic, and that would be true in the case of the Arctic Council, but on the military component, we have not fully addressed and understood the dramatic shifts over the last 12 to 24 months that have occurred in militarization.
So you think we need to relook at that given what's happening?
Absolutely. And I said, it's not just for the Arctic's sake, although important changes are happening. We have to look at this at a broader theater. And that's what the first military exercise signaled, that they're integrating theaters. So what happens in the Baltic Sea, the North Sea, the Barents Sea, and the Arctic, it's a continuation of operations. So we have to look at it holistically, not only land component, as you rightly note, but also I'm particularly concerned, and what our allies, our Norwegian and British allies are very concerned, is the maritime component. Senator King, it was the North Atlantic is becoming a much more active theater in maritime as well as air.
Let me ask for General Jones and General Keane. You know, I've had the opportunity to train a lot in cold weather at Bridgeport and up in Alaska. Can infantry troops, say based at Camp Pendleton or based at Fort Benning, go to the Arctic, operate in the mountains in 30 below zero, in extreme cold, extreme winter climate, can they do that easily, or do you need troops to be able to acclimatize to that?
You need special training, and you need, but to the bigger strategic point, since 1945, the United States has recognized that if you're not present where you need to be present and you're absent, you create a vacuum. And vacuums are usually filled by people that don't share your same interests. And you know, I use the term virtual presence as actual absence, but actual absence means you're creating vacuums. And the United States, if it desires to be globally significant power by the year 2050, needs to think about strategically what we're going to do to avoid increasing the number of vacuums that we're creating around the world.
Thank you. General Keane?
Yeah, Senator, thanks for your military service. I spent 4 years in Alaska as a company commander, paratrooper, jumping all over the place, and you know, on different glaciers, etc. It was quite an experience. Yes, I mean, the acclimatization, the special equipment, everything that you need to operate in minus 30, minus 40-degree temperatures routinely, the toughness of the soldiers themselves to operate in an environment like that. That's why we have forces there, for that very reason. Parachute forces have a strategic capability,
Yeah.
and that's why they're of value to us to this day, because you can seize an airfield with them very quickly and then bring in a lot of other things to help them out. But what is happening here, and I hope the other senators understand, is the Budget Control Authority and sequestration is driving the force structure of the Army down to World War II, pre-World War II numbers. So the force structure peaked in fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan at 570, and we couldn't fight those wars at those numbers simultaneously. We actually had to do it sequentially, and that's lost on a lot of people. We're at 490 going to 450, and the Budget Control Authority and sequestration will take the Army to 420. I was with the Chief of Staff and his 4 stars just the other day dealing with this very subject. And the question was asked, why are we doing this? And he has no choice but to take brigades out of his force structure because of what the Budget and Control Authority is doing to him. Now, he does have a choice which brigades, and there is an argument and a trade-off that he's trying to make. This was done in conjunction with the Pacific Theater Commander, and where he also wanted his forces, not just the Army. So that is an issue. But let me just say that we have a Democratic president and a Republican House of Representatives and a Republican Senate. And both of these entities are underwriting sequestration and the decapping of military capabilities and putting this country at a greater security risk than it needs to. And we got to stop it. I mean, we got to stop this and stop this free fall of military capability.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I indulge one final question? This is an important topic to me. Strategically, do you think it's a mistake to be taking our only airborne BCT out of the Arctic, given what this panel has been discussing for the last 3 hours in terms of a massive increase with regard to what Putin is doing and how we are getting rid of the only Arctic warriors we have? I'll just ask all the members. You can just say yes or no if you think it's a strategic mistake.
I think we have to retain the current assets that we have in theater and look at how we can best augment to be able to rapidly respond and deploy if necessary.
General Keane is absolutely right about the budget.
General Jones, General Keane.
Sorry, I agree with that.
So,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator